Hi everyone, my name is Kabelo Maaka. I go by Cabblow on the internet, and I am the creative director and founder of Cabblow Studios, an award-winning animation and illustration studio based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I am also a 2D character animator, and I'm going to take you through this tutorial where I show you how to deal with a complex example of complex piece of 2D character animation, and I'm going to take you from the storyboard to the rough animation, the tie down, clean up, and then to the final color. So I'm going to show you why this animation is complex. I'm going to show you how I plan an animation and problem solve along the way. I'll also show you some principles of animation being used to create this project. And this whole tutorial is done inside TV Paint, which is the software that I use regularly. But what the principles that I'm going to cover can be applied and used in any 2D animation software. This tutorial is less about the tools of the software and more about an understanding of how to create complex movement within 2D animation. So without further ado, let's get into it. So this is the character that I'm working with today. Her name is Gloria. We designed her for a 6-episode project that we did for one of our medical animation clients, Boringa Ingelheim. And it was about Gloria, who's this middle-aged working woman who has type 2 diabetes and the lifestyle changes that she needs to make. And Gloria is a little bit clumsy, very stressed out with the work that she does. And so this is the character variations that we did for Gloria. We ended up picking the outfit that's in pink. And just for context for this animation, in the first episode, Gloria is getting ready for work. She's like quickly trying to put on lipstick and mascara. She sees a notification on her cell phone that she's got a meeting, and then she rushes off because she's late. So that's where this will pick up in the tutorial. What I'm working on here is the animation where she's actually running, where she is running and she's late. And where I'm picking up in the tutorials is I've already put together the run cycle. So if you know the book, The Animator Survival Kit, in that book there are tons of I suppose they're almost like templates, but they're like references for ways to animate certain movements, certain body mechanics. And in there it outlines how to deal with walks and how to deal with runs. So the basic way that I built up Gloria's run was with these key poses that make up a run cycle, where you have your contact pose, you've got your down pose, you've got your pose where she's up in the air, you've got your pose where she's switching legs. So as I was building up the rough animation for Gloria, I built it up using this run cycle and tweaked it so that it doesn't feel too much like the template and too mechanical, but a little bit more feminine in the way that Gloria moves. So the reason why then this is now an advanced 2D animation tutorial is you enter into this tutorial with an understanding that you know how to do walk cycles and run cycles. So that part I won't cover, but you've got that template there on screen if you need to know how to build a run cycle. So what I'm doing here is I'm now starting to add overlapping action. And before I even explain what I'm doing here, I want to explain what's happening with the rough animation. So you can see there's a lot of different colors in the way that I've done this animation, and it was because I had to figure out a number of different things along the way while trying to build up Gloria's animation. As I had to figure out what is her body doing first, because the body that's running, that's carrying because she's got all these props and accessories, she's got this big hair, the big hair, the props, the accessories, all of that's going to get affected by the main movement of Gloria's body. So I had to figure out what's happening with her body from start to finish. I've used different colors to separate how I've organized my layers. So the main body is in blue, and then the arms are in green. So I figured out what's happening with her body, and now I'm working on her arms. And so that's why the rough animation is in different colors. But this is what I would do to start planning an animation. It's the basic shapes that make up the character's design and proportions. So I'm not thinking at all right now about the details of the costume design. I'm not even thinking about what's happening with her face. I'm also once I figured out what's happening with her body, I'll go in and animate the accessories that she's carrying. But to start off with, I'm just thinking about Gloria's main shapes that make up her body. And as she's running, because she's carrying things, I don't have to think about arm movement. Because you know, when you're walking or when you're running, if your right leg is in front, then your left arm if your right leg is in front, then your left arm is in front. If your right leg is at the back, then your left arm is at the back. So your arms and legs are alternating. Otherwise, it would be awkward, and we wouldn't be able to balance when we walk. So in this run cycle, the nice thing is I don't have to actually think about the alternating arms, which can be a point of confusion when you're making a run cycle. I can just animate her holding her books and her accessories and all of that. And not have to think about her arm movement, but I will have to think about everything else that's moving: her hair, the accessories, eventually the clothing, the acting that's happening on her face. I will say this though, something that is happening with her arms is she's holding a handbag and she's grabbing it tightly as she's sort of rushing off to wherever she's going because she's late for her meeting. And so what's happening with the arms is an animation principle called secondary action, which is not to be confused with overlapping action. So secondary action has to do with character acting, where you've got multiple layers of acting and emotion added to a performance so that you have extra details that add to the character's emotions, or they add to the performance, the overall performance. So Gloria isn't doing the alternating arm movement where your arms alternate when you run, but she is grabbing tightly to her handbag, and there will eventually be papers in her arms. So that's what's happening with the arm movement. It's actually secondary action, which is a principle of animation. But I also wanted to point out something really important that's happening with Gloria's run cycle. As you can see here, I've got all my onion skins showing. So onion skin is a tool in an animation software that shows you the previous frames of animation and the coming frames in animation as it relates to the current frame that you're on. And so I kind of switched on all of my frames, switched on the visibility of all of my frames in the onion skin tool so that I could see what's happening with my arc. So you can see that the arc is curving down and up and when you run and when you walk, this is what the masters will tell you, is to achieve a natural sense of movement, you've got to have an arc that you create with a character's movement so that it feels like the poses are flowing into one another. And so we've got this arc here. So arcs is one of the principles of animation that's happening here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to let the time-lapse play so you can see how I work through this rough animation, and then I'm going to explain the next step of the process. So now that I've figured out the main movement of the body, I've sorted out the arm movement, I'm moving on to overlapping action in the hair and in the handbag. There might be some in the papers, but I don't think so. So what I'm doing right now is I'm tracing over a keyframe that I had set up of the hair to get the shape of the hair so that I can then animate it. And the reason why I'm doing overlapping action is to add that natural sense of the effect of gravity and natural timing in the way that she's running. So Gloria's got a big head full of hair, and as she's running, bits and pieces of that hair is going to bob up and down in response to her running. The same with the bag. The bag that's hanging off of her arm, and the little accessory that's hanging off of the bag. All of that has to swing, and it will also swing on its own arc as Gloria runs. So same as before, I had written a tip on screen that I flip. So I've got onion skin on, and a lot of masters will say don't rely too much on onion skin, and I do agree to a certain extent. If you rely too much on using onion skin, your proportions might go off. But when you've got like really tight spacing, what I've got here, so the difference between the two frames of drawings is so subtle, and you can see now. Look at what I'm doing. I'm flipping to see how is the hair responding to her head lifting up. How do the bits and pieces of hair, do they flop down or do they flop up? I'm making a note here, stretch. I guess the hair is now starting to stretch. But anyway, back to onion skinning. I keep the onion skin on because I am still flipping through the frames to see how, you see, I'm trying to see the natural movement of how the hair is going to change between frames. And then I keep the onion skin on because her design is so detailed. So that's also something else that makes an animation complex, is when you've got detailed character designs. Another thing that can make an animation complex is if you've got characters interacting with one another. If you've so like in this example I have on screen, this is from another episode from the same project, where it's now a husband and wife, and she's pushing him across the screen, and they're interacting with each other and having to respond to each other, and it's a complex action of walking, but she's shoving him across the screen. So that can be what makes a shot complex, or it can be the details in the character design, which is what I mentioned before. So as I'm animating Gloria here, and this is in real time, that's on screen, I'm tracking what's happening with her hair. When is it squashing? When is it stretching? And I'm doing this straight ahead, which is another principle of animation, where I'm not pre-planning the poses, but I'm animating it spontaneously. And the reason why I can do overlapping action straight ahead, so two principles happening at the same time, is because the hair movement is responding to the head's movement in the main action. And so I can't pre-plan how the hair is going to move. It's going to move according to the influence of the main action. And then later on in the same section of the tutorial, I work on the handbag's movement. So the handbag, as she's running and she's kind of grabbing tightly to the handbag is going to swing. And same as when I had the body in blue, the arms in green, the hair is now in purple. The handbag, I think I did it in orange. Yeah, I colored in I did the line, the rough animation of the handbag in orange, so that I can just tell the difference between all of my layers of movement. When you are working on a complex piece of animation, it's very important to keep track of all of the details. And we have the benefit of layers. So you don't have to animate the body and the hair and the handbag and the arms on one layer. You can separate everything so that you can control the movement, especially when different types of movement have got different types of timing, which is also another principle of animation. So what I'm going to do now is let this time lapse play so you can see how I work through the hair's animation, and then eventually you're going to see how I work through the handbag animation. And then from here, the rough animation is pretty much complete. The only thing that I have left to do after this is the face. And I've kept the face till last because that's where all the characters' emotion is going to be. But also because the face, for me at least, is a little bit... it's like the simplest or the easiest thing for me to deal with once I've figured out how these body mechanics work. You know, how once I figured out the legs and the hair and all these things that are supposed to look natural. When now I can do the face, and the face has its own acting, and you could count that, I suppose, as a secondary action maybe. But yeah, the face has got its own acting because she's got to look like, I'm pressed for time. And so that'll be the last bit of the rough animation, and the face as well will also be on its own layer. And then once that is done, I'll be able to move on to the next step, which is called tie down, where I start actually putting the details of the character design on top of the rough animation and correcting any sort of proportion issues and all of that. So please enjoy the time lapse as I work on the overlapping action of the hair and the handbag. See you soon. So I actually wanted to interrupt the time lapse quickly because I noticed something interesting here. As I was doing the hair, I noticed that it was gonna start bouncing the same way over and over. So I picked up where it would start repeating, and then I named the frames. That's why you see the numbers 14, 15, 16. And so what I started doing is as I went back to the previous bouncing hair animation, and I duplicated the frames. You can do this in most animation softwares. You can duplicate your frames, but this is an example of the ways in which I problem solve in the middle of animating. So I realized that I don't have to redraw every single frame of the hair bouncing, or draw a new kind of movement for the hair bouncing as she runs. There can be some repetition and looping. So what I'm doing here, you can see, is I would copy a frame, paste it, and then move it to where it aligns with the character animation. And then adjust it here and there. So you see here, I've copied it, I've pasted, I'm moving it, and then I'm going to just adjust it so it makes sense with the rest of the drawing. So you can do this. You don't have to redraw everything. We live in the digital age, so use the digital tools. This is not cheating. This is problem solving. Repeat your frames if you have to. Okay, back to the time lapse. Me again, here I am just checking the handbag arc using the onion skins. So just like how the run cycle had an arc, the handbag as it swings will also have a natural arc. And with that, the rough animation is complete. In my opinion, the rough animation stage is the hardest part of animating in terms of getting the technical movement right for your character. And you can see with this rough animation, Gloria starts really close to us and then zooms out and she runs further away. I'll just quickly explain what I did there. So I took the run cycle animation that I created and I created a loop run cycle where it's like she runs in one place. And I did that so that I could have a run in one place and then have the camera zoom out and then have a run towards the left of the screen. You can see now there's the animation where she's running in one place. All I did was that same animation that I had, I just layered it on top of each other so that she would run in place instead of run to the left. And then in order to create camera movement in any animation software, you can either use the virtual camera that's inside the software, or you can scale your animation. So you can make your animation really big and then keyframe it so that it shrinks down in size. And keyframing works differently in different animation software. So because this tutorial is not about software, it's about movement. I just wanted to show you that quickly so that you can see that that's where that comes from. But just going back to the rough animation, once you've figured out how the character moves in the rough animation, the next steps aren't as complicated in terms of pinning down movement. The next steps are now about fixing your proportions, adding your details, cleanup, and color. So now it's about persevering to the end as an animator, whereas at the beginning you're persevering, but you're problem solving and you're figuring out how this thing moves. Now that you've figured out how it moves, it's time to finalize your animation. So now I'm moving on to the tie down phase, where I'm starting to put the details of the character design into the movement. And you've seen all along on the screen on the right, I've had Gloria's design open on my computer screen as a reference. When you are adding details and you're tying down your animation, meaning now you are fixing your proportions and making sure that the character looks exactly like how she is supposed to look. When you're doing that, it's very important that you keep your character design in front of you, whether it's stuck up on the wall, whether it's to the side on your screen, or if you've got like referencing tools inside the software that you're using that you can keep your animation as a reference, or you're using some kind of referencing app, whatever it might be. You have to make sure that your design is in front of you at all times. Otherwise, you won't be able to match the design accurately. You'll just be drawing what you think the design looks like instead of what it actually looks like. Even if you were the person who designed the character, because I designed Gloria in this instance, and it's very easy for me to just assume that because I designed her, I know what she looks like. But it may not necessarily be the case. My proportions might be a little bit off. My shapes, my legs. I remember at some point when I was correcting this animation and doing the tie down, I would have to make her legs smaller because they were too long, or I would have to shrink her feet because they were too big. So even when you are the one who designed the character, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to be able to do tie down and clean up without having that original character design there as a reference. So I can't stress this point enough. This is where your beautiful movement that you figured out in your rough animation can go awry if you don't stick to the character design and keep it consistent. This is now the tie down animation. You can see now she's got facial animation. She's got the details in the costume design and the movement of the props. Now the last thing that is left to do is to actually clean this up. Ordinarily, when you do cleanup for an animation, you can do the same thing as before, where you separate layers of movement to keep your cleanup control over your cleanup. But because this animation she's holding a lot of things, and she's got her hair and her clothing and all of that. I decided to do all of the cleanup of Gloria's animation on one layer. So here you see me using a black textured brush to do the clean lines for Gloria's animation. This is the final step in making sure the details of the animation are correct to the design. And cleanup can take a long time, and it can be the point where you kind of get really tired of animating. When I looked through all of this footage, it's about 6 hours of footage of me animating this project. So animation really does require a lot of endurance, just to create a few seconds. It can take us hours. But cleanup really is like, woo, the finish line. And so here I am cleaning up. I'm just going to let it do a time lapse. I think it takes me about 15 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes to do one frame of cleanup. So I'm going to let the time lapse play, and then I'll show you the final result of the cleanup, and then we're going to wrap up this tutorial. So from here, the cleanup animation is done. And what I've done here is I've just paused Gloria's animation so you can see what's happening with the background. If you watch the animation itself, there's actually a bit of background animation where the lines of the background are boiling. That's something that the background artist actually did. So she animated frames of the background moving. So at this point, the animation is actually complete, and what would happen from here is the animation now moves away from me, the animator, and goes to the colorist. So now my job as the animator is done. And what I would provide to the colorist as the director, I actually provide color options. I mean, a color guide for the colorist to now finish Gloria's animation, which is this still image that you see on screen, where Gloria is being colored in, and the colors are taken from the original character design that we did of Gloria. So the colorist would then take the animation that I've done, create their own project file within TV Paint, and color in frame by frame Gloria so that she looks exactly like the color design, character design. And then from here the animation is done. So that's it. That's how I tackled this complex piece of animation, from the rough animation, from the storyboard to the rough animation, and then tie down and clean up. I hope this was a really useful tutorial for you to watch, and feel free to watch it again, pause, rewind, and try applying the notes that I've given you from my experience making this animation to your project that you will work on. Otherwise, that's it for me. My name is Kabelo Maaka from Cabblow Studios. I hope you have a happy day wherever you are in the world. Bye bye.